best thing for any sport is rivalries. Whether it's the Yankees, Red Sox, and baseball, or old school smash mouth football with the Bears and the Packers, nothing beats a grudge match between two historic rivals. In the NBA, you got a few well-known ones, like the Lakers and the Celtics, but outside of that, the NBA has the least rivalries out of any pro sports leagues. Over the 80s and 90s, in the era of Bird and Magic, and most of all Michael, the NBA moved away from pushing teams and focused on the superstar. Since then, the NBA has been a star-driven league, and whether you like it or not, that approach isn't going anywhere. It sells tickets, merchandise, and most of all, TV contracts. But what actually makes a good rivalry, and why don't they exist more in the NBA? A good rivalry is based on two teams playing important games over the course of multiple years. And of course, it adds extra juice if they're in the same region. Through those important grudge matchups, they develop a strong dislike of each other. Eventually, that dislike turns into hatred, and sometimes, even a brawl or two can break out. In this video, we're going to cover the top 5 most disappointing NBA rivalries. We will discuss and dissect why these rivalries never really took off. And if you wait till the end, I have a question I want to ask you about Michael Jordan's Bulls. But before we get started, please click on the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're dropping cool videos like this all the time, and we're young, so appreciate anything you can do to help us grow. Okay, now let's go. Number 5, Suns vs. Spurs. We're talking about the years 2004 to 2010. The Spurs during the Tim Duncan era won 5 championships, while the Suns in the Steve Nash era were perennial underachievers. The Spurs had 2 main rivals during this era, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Phoenix Suns. They played some of the most unforgettable series against the Lakers, but unfortunately the ones against the Suns were quite forgettable. You may not remember this, but the two teams played during the playoffs in the 2004-2005 season, the 2006-2007 season, the 2007-2008 season, and the 2009-2010 season. You'd think that would make some sort of a rivalry, right? Well, the first 2 times were in the Western Conference Finals, while the other 2 were earlier in the playoffs. So what made this rivalry so boring? This one's multi-layered. They won in 5 games in 2004-2005 and 6 games in 06-07. The Spurs were in their prime during these years, with Duncan dominating and supported by a deep roster of players plucked from obscurity that turned into household names like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. When the Suns finally won in the Western Conference semifinals, the Spurs were still good, but they were starting to age. It wasn't until the next year when they added a young superstar in Kawhi Leonard. It was a boring 4-0 sweep by the Suns. So why weren't they that big of a rivalry? The main issue was these teams didn't really hate each other. There weren't really any goons on either of the teams besides a short stint in Phoenix by Matt Barnes, who we all know can be a massive dick on the court. And off it probably too. Hell, the most exciting thing that happened is Steve Nash got a bloody nose in one game. I know this is starting to sound like an MMA channel, but stick with me. On top of the fact that the Spurs played very good defense and took away the run and gun style of the Suns, a lot of this just made for a boring matchup. Number 4, Miami Heat versus the Los Angeles Lakers. This one is disappointing for a different reason than the others. This one is disappointing because the rivalry never actually happened. You see, in 2011, the Lakers were coming into the season looking for a three-peat. They just defeated the Magic and Celtics in back-to-back finals. But this was also their first season post-Phil Jackson. But there was a new superpower in the East. The Miami Heat formed one of the league's first modern-era super teams, led by LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. It's debatable, but in my opinion, this is the beginning of LeBron's prime. Well, when one star was rising, the 2011 and 2012 seasons were probably the last of Kobe Bryant's prime. And these are the 2 years that LeBron and Kobe crossed paths. The Lakers finished 3rd in the West in 2011 and were knocked out in the second round by the Mavericks. The Heat went on to lose to the Mavs in the finals, led by Dirk Nowitzki. By 2012, the Lakers were a mid-tier team, and the Heat were absolutely humming, working for their first championship together. It just wasn't meant to be. This had all the ingredients of a great rivalry. You had 2 of 5 all-time players in their prime, one team off back-to-back championships, and the other with a newly built dynasty with aspirations for not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7 championships. But now we're just left wondering, what if? Number 3, Knicks versus Nets. Having two teams in the world's biggest media market should make for some great rivalry games. However, it didn't. When the Knicks are good, the energy coming out of New York is electric. The Garden is on fire. Even during the 2020 season, before the league moved into the bubble, the Knicks were only borderline good. But don't tell their fans that. After being bad the most part of the past, 20 seasons, everyone in New York was just happy with mediocrity. The Nets, on the other hand, played in Long Island in the ABA and then moved to New Jersey in 1977. They were always second fiddle to the Knicks out in New Jersey. That turned around with the acquisition of Jason Kidd, when they dominated the East, but laid an absolute egg in back-to-back finals, losing both. Once Jason Kidd and Vince Carter left, the team struggled for years until moving to Brooklyn in 2012. They had New York's attention when they first got there, but after mortgaging their future for older players, it was followed with a decade of mediocrity. Now, even being a few miles from each other, and so many star players in Brooklyn, there's still no buzz. These two franchises played in the playoffs 3 times, in '83, '94, and 2004, but none of them were competitive. Both teams are rarely good, and if they are, they just don't seem to be good at the same time, making this the number 3 most disappointing rivalry. Number 2, the Houston Rockets versus the Golden State Warriors. During the Warriors' tenure as Western Conference royalty, they lacked a truly good rival. They were able to overcome the Spurs, who, like we said, aged out. They missed Kobe's Lakers by a few years, but you had the closest thing. It was the Houston Rockets. In 2013, the Rockets acquired James Harden from the Thunder. He was tasked with turning the franchise around, and he did that in the first season, finishing with a 54-28 record. But, which may have become a theme in his career, he lost in the first round of the playoffs to the Portland Trail Blazers, fizzling out and leading to disappointment. The Warriors and Rockets played 4 times in the playoffs between 2014 and 2019. The Warriors easily won in 5 games in 2014 and 15 and 25 and 16 seasons. It was clear that James Harden was simply not enough for the historically great Warriors. Sure, he had Dwight Howard as a running mate one year, but that just simply didn't work. It also didn't help that the Warriors were becoming one of the best teams in NBA history. Then in the 2017-2018 season, Houston went out and acquired Chris Paul to be Harden's running mate. These two guys flourished in the pick and roll game and were able to take Houston to the Western Conference Finals and take on Steph Curry and that company once again. This time they had him. They were up 3-2 in the series with a golden opportunity to finally get over the hump. Plus, Golden State superstar Kevin Durant was also hurt. But in the closing seconds of their Game 5 win, Chris Paul infamously pulled his hamstring. The Warriors would come back to win in 7 games, and the Houston era would eventually end without ever getting past Golden State. All Houston had to do was win once to make this series not disappointing. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that, and the rivalry is already forgotten. And now, number 1, the Los Angeles Clippers versus the Los Angeles Lakers. This is another inner-city rivalry, but unlike the Nets and the Knicks, these two played under the same roof at the Staples Center for years. Yeah, I still call it the Staples Center and probably always will. These two franchises couldn't be more different. The Lakers have been the class of the NBA for decades, while the Clippers have been bottom feeders for most of their existence. Now recently, the Clippers have had some good years, making it all the way to the Western Conference Finals in 2021, led by Paul George. But believe it or not, these teams have never met in the playoffs. The Lakers, of course, have one of the biggest fan bases in all of sports, while the Clippers have always been an afterthought in the same city. They haven't been in any position to take Laker fans away. However, the biggest culprit to the Clippers' problem was Donald Sterling, their racist, eccentric owner who has consistently held the Clippers back with his stingy spending and terrible leadership. He was replaced with Microsoft co-founder Steve Ballmer, who's building a brand new stadium in Inglewood at the site of the Los Angeles Forum. While he is trying to establish roots in LA, the Lakers have a complete chokehold on that fan base for now. But hey, at least the Clippers got Clipper Darryl. So those are the top 5 disappointing rivalries in the NBA. But as I mentioned earlier, I have a question for you. Had Michael Jordan's Bulls wound up playing Hakeem Olajuwon's Rockets during those 2 years Jordan went to play baseball, what do you think would have happened? That could have been one of the best rivalries in NBA history. Even better than the Heat versus Lakers. I think the Bulls would have dropped at least one of those Rocket squads. Probably both. But what do you think? Leave a comment below and let me know.